That's just silly. All right, then let's just go ahead and get started. Good evening. My name is Drea Douglas. I am the learning coordinator here at the North Bend Public Library. Raise your hand if you know what a learning coordinator is. Notice that my hand did not move. This is basically a great job where I get to do adult programming. I get to buy books for adults. It's the best gig in the world. And this summer, the summer reading program theme is Imagine Your Story. So we've got a lot of folklore, we've got a lot of folk tales, we've got fairy tales, we've got true stories, and what we really have are storytellers. Every one of us is, of course, a storyteller, but tonight we're focusing on one, and that would be the Emmy Award-winning Jim May. Jim is based in Illinois. He is coming to us from a theater with a storied history, and he's going to be telling several wonderful stories almost as soon as I let this next person in. Wink, good to have you here. And
Wink, hi.
Yeah, your old friend Wink is here.
Hi, Wink.
Okay.
My Facebook wing person.
It's nice to have Wink here, someone from Portland representing. We've got Long Beach. We have North Bend, Oregon, and considering this is coming from North Bend, it's nice to have someone here representing. Much appreciated. So without further, Jim, welcome. Thank you so much for doing this. And could you tell us, please, about where you are talking to us from?
Well, first of all, it's great to be with you Oregonians. Is that correct?
That is correct.
I'd hope to be there on your actual terra firma, sampling your fresh oysters and sea scallops and admiring your beautiful coast. I was even considering bringing along my favorite novel, perhaps of all times, Ken Kesey, Sometimes a Great Notion, which is about the Oregon logging industry. But anyways, that was not to be. So here I am at the Woodstock, Illinois Opera House, Stage Left Cafe, which is kind of an annex performance space, lovely cafe that is attached to the main building, which was built in the 1890s. And it's where Orson Welles got his start. He went to school here. And of course, he was a prodigious genius even in high school. And I think when he was a sophomore in high school, he directed and performed in Hamlet. And he happened to meet two professional actors from Dublin here on the Woodstock Opera House stage. They saw his gift and they invited him to Ireland, and the rest is history. So here we are, and I'm just going to start. I grew up in a little tiny farming town, Spring Grove, Illinois. Northern Illinois, just up against the Wisconsin state line. And the first stories I heard were stories about trading a blind horse for a dry cow and who got the better of the deal. My dad was a farmer, and I would tag along with him to horse stables and dairy barns. But when I got older, I just wanted to get away from the small town life. And by the time I was 16, I ached for a town that had a movie theater, for a town that had a place for teenagers to dance. I was tired of being referred to as a hick by my more urbane and cosmopolitan friends from McHenry, population 500 to R200. But at the age of 18, I escaped and enrolled at the University of Illinois. And I studied Russian history and urban problems. That's honest to God truth. I think I wanted to get as far away from my hometown as I could. Well, many years later, I'm back living near my hometown, where my family's lived now for 4 generations. And I've written books about this place and tell stories about it. So that's, in brief, who I am and what I do. My father's nickname was Shorty May. He wasn't particularly short. He was about 5'11", about my height. But he was the second son born to a farm family of 12. And his oldest brother, my Uncle Ben, gave him that nickname Shorty, and it stuck. He was 51 years old when I was born. My mother was 42. We were a Catholic family, and I was a rhythm baby. My mom always said we Catholics are always obsessed with 2 things, rhythm and bingo. And if the rhythm didn't work, bingo. So I was bingo. Now, there were certain advantages to being the last one of the litter. When I was 6 years old, I was too young to go to the one-room school down the road. It was the Keystone Elementary School. It was one room, one teacher, 25 students, 8 grades. The first row from the window was first grade. The second row from the window was second grade. Third grade did not even have its own row. There was only one boy in third grade, my cousin Petey May, and he was alone in his class all the way through to graduation. He graduated valedictorian, first in his class. Also, best athlete, poorest speller, and most likely to succeed. I still to this day run into Petey, my cousin, mostly at funerals. That's where I meet the cousins these days. And we were laughing one time about him being the only one in his graduating class. He said, yeah, it worked out okay, though, because, sometimes me and the wife, we just need some space. And I get kind of huffy and taciturn. I just, turn and walk out the door. And she'll say, now, where are you going? And I say, I'm going to a class reunion. Well, I love that school. And but when I was 6, I was still too young to enter, so my dad had to take care of me that year on the farm. My mom had a job at the Woodstock typewriter factory, Woodstock, Illinois, where I'm standing right now. And we had a typewriter factory here, the famous Woodstock typewriters. Now, you may know about the Woodstock typewriter. You may, if you're as old as I am, you might have even used one. There's a historical story or a historic sort of an anecdote about Woodstock typewriters. Richard Nixon, when he was an ambitious young attorney for the House Un-American Activities Committee, he was able to prosecute Alger Hiss as a Russian spy. It was a successful prosecution. Alger had been writing notes to the Russians. They were called the spy papers. And Richard Nixon found the spy papers in a pumpkin, and they're known today as the pumpkin papers in historical records. Found the spy papers that Alger Hiss had typed in his parlor in the pumpkin behind Whitaker Chambers Farm in Pennsylvania. And Richard Nixon traced those pumpkin papers back to the Woodstock typewriter in Alger Hiss's parlor or office, and that was the evidence that convicted him. So there you have it. If it wasn't for Woodstock, Illinois, where I'm standing right now, there never would have been a Watergate. And I'm not a crook. Anyways, so I wasn't old enough to go to that school when I was 6. So I would just tag along with my dad. Wherever he went, I went along with. And it was a great way to spend my 6th year. I remember sitting on the tractor with him when we'd be out plowing in the spring, sitting on that big old iron tractor seat with the holes in for the rainwater to drain through. There was plenty of room for both of us to sit on that seat. He'd plow the deep black Illinois turf, and I'd turn and watch the furrows turning and watch seagulls and blackbirds following along, picking at the worms. Sometimes I'd help him steer. Most of the time, I would just hang on to his arms, daydream, and enjoy the smell of the sweat and the Old Spice. Sometimes when we came in from the field, he would pull under the chokecherry tree along the fence row in midsummer, about this time of the year, and he'd stop and he'd turn the engine off, and get real quiet. When you're around a machine or lawnmower maybe, working in a factory, suddenly when those machines stop, there's this kind of silence descends as a welcome kind of presence usually. I could hear the wind rustling the small chokecherry trees. Sitting on that tractor in the shade, in the quiet, my dad would take off his straw hat and hand it to me. I knew what to do. I'd climb up and around the steering wheel onto the steel hood of the tractor, and I'd reach up and I would pick the chokecherries and put them in his straw hat. Then I'd go back and sit in his lap, and we'd sit there eating chokecherries. Now, they didn't call them chokecherries for nothing. They're bittersweet at best. And my mom always had to put a lot of sugar in those chokecherries to make a jam that was palatable. But to me, it was special, sitting there with my dad eating something wild that we had found together. And he would teach me things during those times under the shade tree. He would teach me to listen to the sounds of the birds. Now, he could whistle like a Bob White quail. He could make some bird calls. And the Bob White was his favorite. Now, the Bob White says its name in 2 syllables. It's a whistle. It's kind of a like that, Bob White. But every once in a while, you'll hear an individual Bob White call like this. Robert White? I don't know. Perhaps some Bob Whites are more formal than others. But anyways, that was our routine, my dad and I. Well, one day I couldn't go with him out to the field. It was one of those glorious days in May in the spring. It was already 70 degrees at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I remember running downstairs in my jersey, we called them in those days. It was a t-shirt. I ran into the kitchen. I could smell the lilac blossoms, the perfume coming through the open screen. Looked out the window, there were apple blossoms. I ran outside, and sure enough, there was my dad. And he was standing next to the corn planter under the big oak tree in our backyard. He had apparently milked his cows early that morning, and he was going to work in the field. He had the canisters open for the corn planter. It was an old 2-row planter converted from horse-drawn. Now the planters have 30 rows at a time. Back then it was 2. I watched them empty the yellow kernels of corn into the small canisters, and then the powdery fertilizer into the large canisters. And he fastened the wing nuts down, looked at me. Then he pointed up to the oak tree and he said, "It's time to plant corn. We plant our corn when the oak leaves are the size of a squirrel's ear." And that's ecologically sound, has to do with the temperature of the soil. And then he said, "I'm going to plant corn the whole day. I'll come in for dinner, our noon meal, we called it dinner, but I'm going to plant the rest of the day." And I thought, oh boy, I can't wait. I've never planted corn before. That sounds interesting. Then he looked at me kind of hard. And after a pause, he said, "But you're going to stay back at the house." Oh, I thought, what an injustice. I was terribly disappointed. Looking back, I think he was worried about me. Now, on a corn planter, especially an old-fashioned one converted from horse-drawn, the farmer has to reach back and put the planter in gear manually. Now, back in the horse-drawn days, the farmer would be sitting back there, and the horses would be up in front where the tractor is. But things had changed, so the farmer had to put it in gear manually. Also had to turn at the end of each field and mark the next row. So another marker arm had to go down. You had to pull up another marker arm. There's a lot of moving around and kind of commotion, my dad would say, on a planter. And maybe he was worried about me. Maybe he was afraid I'd be bumped, that I'd fall off the tractor, get under a wheel. Farming is dangerous work. It's right up there with being a policeman, a fireman, or a construction worker. Anybody who's farmed for any length of time has known someone who's lost a hand in a machine, or who's lost a child or a father or a husband. It's dangerous. And he was worried about me, so he said, "You're going to stay back at the house today while I'm in the field. Now, I know you'll be alone," he said, "so if there's trouble, ring the bell." Well, we had an old bell on the roof of an old shanty. The shanty was the oldest building on our place. It was built originally for carriages. It was much too narrow for the big cars we had in the 50s. Now, they use those shanties now. Those shanties went right from buggies to Toyotas. But back then, there'd just be rusty license plates tacked to the wall, maybe a stack of bald tires in a corner. But I loved the old shanty. I could usually find something rusty, greasy thing to play with in there. Well, that morning, he walked me into the shanty, and I saw that the old rope that was attached to a bell on the roof of the shanty was hanging low so I could reach it. Old, greasy hemp rope. Now, usually that rope was tied off high on a rafter. So he must have gotten up early that morning and climbed up and let the rope down, or maybe the night before. And he said to me, "Now, if there's trouble, pull on this rope, ring the bell, and I'll hear you out in the field and I'll come in. I know you'll be here alone, and I know you're scared, but if there's trouble, pull on the rope, ring the bell, and I'll come in. It's not for foolishness, but if there's trouble, ring the bell. And then he climbed onto the tractor, and I watched him go down the lane, the tractor getting smaller and smaller and smaller, pulling the corn planter. And at the end of the lane, he turned and he disappeared. He was gone. And I was alone there on the farm. And I didn't like it very much. I tried to spend some time, pass the time, kill some time by playing in the hayloft with my 3 imaginary friends, Sonny, Tony, and Harvey. We crouched on top of alfalfa mountaintops, waiting for unsuspecting outlaws to pass beneath so we could pounce upon them, tie them up, and take the money they had stolen from the bank and turn it into the sheriff for the big reward. Our horses cleverly hidden in the outhouse. That got boring after about 5 minutes. So I decided I would go in and inspect the shanty, my favorite building anyhow, and the shanty seemed to have particular significance on this particular morning. I walked into the shanty, and when my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw there, laying in a dirt hole, our dog Bootsy. Now, Bootsy was my favorite pet on the farm. When you think of dairy farms and cow farms, cattle farms, you always think of big dogs, you know, blue heelers, Australian shepherds, German shepherds, border collies, Dobermans. My dad liked to cross these rat terriers with chihuahuas. And that was Bootsy. Ornery little yappy dog. She favored the chihuahua side of the family, both in form and temperament. But she had a country dog's heart. She loved to chase cows. And she loved to attack cows. She'd run up and she'd bite the cows right in the heel, in the soft part there. And the cows would kick at her, but they'd miss every time because she was so short. Worked out pretty good. She was a cattle herding chihuahua. It was kind of comical. My dad would bring neighbors over and say, "Look at that, cattle herding chihuahua." And they just kind of shake their heads. Well, things worked out fine for Bootsy because we had these kind of tall, lanky Holstein cows. Your typical black and white, beautiful Holstein milking cows. You've seen them everywhere growing up, and today if you live in the country. But they're tall and long-legged, and they would kick, you know, and they'd miss Bootsy. She'd just kind of duck, and they'd just go right over her head. It was pretty confusing for the cows, you know. They'd be out in the pasture, you know, just kind of chilling, you know, on a summer day, you know. "How you doing?" "I'm doing pretty good. How you doing?" "I'm doing okay." "How's the grass?" "It's okay. We could use a little rain." "Yeah, we could always use a little rain." "Oh, something just bit me. By God, you too?" "Well, I'm going to give it a kick right here." "Nothing there." There's again. I'm going to kick it again." "Still nothing there. Is this our imagination? Do I have mad cow disease?" Actually, that scene used to be shorter until a friend of mine, Doug Elliott, wonderful storyteller from North Carolina, he heard me tell that story, and he said, "Jim, I think you can milk that cow scene a little bit longer." Whoa, tough crowd. "Oh, I see you shaking your head, Drea. You'll probably use that tomorrow." Anyways, one day, things were going to change for Bootsy without her knowing. One day, my dad bought a new dairy cow. He actually came right here to Woodstock, Illinois, to Gawky's Sale Barn. It's not here now. It went from being a Ace Hardware, and now it's a craft brewery. It used to be a sale barn. Wednesday nights, there was a big sale. All the farmers would come. It was like the farmers' Walmart. You could get anything at Gawky's auction. You could get cows, horses, ponies, goats, sheep, ducks, geese, turkeys, chickens, roosters, chinchillas, rabbits, no gerbils. Gerbils hadn't been invented yet, but you could get everything else. And my dad, we didn't have any money, so he would just go and hang out with his buddies, chew the fat, he would say, you know, conversation and smoke cheap nickel William Penn cigars. I only was with him once when he bought something. He must have had a little extra money I remember sold to Shorty May. It was a box of rabbits. Oh, I got all excited. Box of pretty white rabbits. I was going to have all these pets to play with, little fluffy, soft white rabbits with pink eyes and little pink silky ears. My mom made a whole batch of Hassenpfeffer that week, and that was the end of my rabbits. But one summer night, we were asleep, and all of a sudden we heard this rumbling, you know, this big old stock truck comes rumbling into our yard. Oh, woke up and looked out the window, and I could see the red taillights. I still remember. And I realized my dad must have bought something big at the auction. I mean, there's no way that there'd be a box of rabbits in that big stock truck. And I ran outside, and sure enough, the tailgate of the truck came down, and my dad led a cow. He had bought a whole cow, a new cow on our farm. Very exciting. And she was unique. She was not a tall black and white Holstein cow. She was what they called a brindle cow. Her color was brindle. Now, out there, if you've seen brindle bulldogs or brindle Great Danes or brindle boxers, or if you've seen brindle Brahma bulls, very impressive. But it's kind of a mixture of colors. And she was kind of a blend of cinnamon and chocolate. And she had swirls across her body and stripes down her side like a tiger. She had kind of a fudge smear across her withers, her shoulders. She looked like a Rocky Road ice cream sundae with 4 legs and a tail. We thought she was the coolest thing. Turns out, though, my dad bought her because she was so beautiful and unusual looking. But whoever sold her because she was dangerous. She was a kicker. Now, it's the last thing you want on a dairy farm is a kicker, because you got to be back there, you know, pulling on those things twice a day, right near those big, powerful hind legs. And sure enough, 3 or 4 days after my dad brought that cow home, he came in from the barn with blood gushing down the side of his face. He had been kicked by the brindle cow. Now, we kids, we were amazed, because my dad was good with animals. My dad was born in 1896. It's maybe why I'm a storyteller. He didn't even have a radio in his life until his 30s. So they depended on stories and anecdotes and making their own music and fun. But anyways, he had worked all his life with horses and cows. He almost never got stepped on, almost never got kicked by a horse or a cow. So when we saw that Dad was injured, in fact, he had to go down to Doc Kagan's in town and get 7 stitches. When we saw that, we kids realized this was a seriously dangerous animal, this brindle cow. So we gave her a wide berth. We stayed away from her. However, Bootsy never figured that out. You know, Chihuahuas don't have a lot of extra brains to figure things out. You know, they got just enough brains kind of packed into that little knobby skull to think about basic things, you know, like eating, sleeping, peeing on the rug, stuff like that. So sure enough, 2 or 3 days after Dad had brought that cow home and been kicked by it, we were out in the pasture, Dad and I and Bootsy, herding the cows in for milking time at the end of the day. And I watched in horror as Bootsy ran up and bit the brindle cow right in the heel. Just took her little needle teeth and sunk it into that soft little puffy flesh behind the heel of that cow. Well, I thought, uh-oh. And sure enough, the brindle cow struck. Not high and angled over Bootsy's head. The brindle cow was built closer to the ground. Shorter legs, but powerful. The brindle cow kicked straight out like a punch, like a jab. Boom. Caught Bootsy right between the eyes. Boink. Punted her through the air. I stood in the pasture watching my Chihuahua spiraling into the clouds. My cattle herding Chihuahua had become a flying Chihuahua. Now, I don't see any of you laughing out there, but trust me, in the junior high schools, this is very funny. And then she came down in kind of a spiral. I was afraid she was going to screw her tail into the ground, but instead she hit with kind of a sickening thud, gave a couple kicks with her 4 white feet. That's why we called her Bootsy. She had 4 white feet. And then she became very still. and the arterial blood that was spasming out of her nose settled down, and there she lay, just as quiet and still and stiff as a board. Broke my heart. I put her in a gunny sack, a burlap bag, and I dragged her all the way home across the stubble field. Probably didn't do her any good. I set the sack at the foot of my bed. I cried myself to sleep. I was going to bury her the next morning in the ever-expanding pet cemetery. Next morning, I woke up. So did Bootsy. Jumped out of the sack, trotted across the plank floor, just as easy as you please, even cleared up this disgusting nasal snort that she had had all her life. When that cow kicked her in the head, it must have knocked the calcified booger loose or something. I don't know. But she lived 10 more free-breathing years after that. And someday that's going to be a picture book called Bootsy, the Cattle Herding Chihuahua. Anyways, back to the day my dad was planting corn. I kind of watched out for Bootsy, you know. And that day when my dad was out in the field and I walked into that shanty about the middle of the day, when I got used to the eyes and pupils of the eye, you know, kind of expand the darkness, I saw Bootsy there, but I saw something else. About 3 or 4 feet from her was a snake, all curled up. I thought of what my dad said. If there's trouble, ring the bell. I looked back at that snake and looked up at the rope. I liked the idea of ringing that rope, you know, ringing that bell. If I pulled on the rope, my dad would come in a little bit sooner. Now, I knew he'd be in for the noon meal that we called dinner, but if I rang it now, I'd get to see him sooner. I was missing him. So I looked back and that snake's face seemed to be getting more serious and determined and dangerous. Now that snake, you know, they do have expressions on their face if you look very closely, but they never smile because they have no lips. Anyhow, I thought that was trouble enough. So I grabbed onto the rope and I gave it a pull. And when the side of that old rusty bell hit the clapper, it just sent the low, rich toll rolling off over the fields. Pigeons got up off the barn roof. The heifers, the young cows, start jumping around in the pasture with their tails straight in the air. You know those heifers, they'll do anything for an excuse for the party. Well, I liked the sound of that bell so much I rang it again. And when that sound had drifted away, I heard another sound. It was my dad's tractor. Every tractor sounds different, and this was his. He had heard the bell and he was coming in. Pretty soon I saw a stream of exhaust smoke over the corn crib, and then him coming around the corner of the tool shed, really moving. He had the old Farmall International H tractor in road gear. Now, that was unusual for him. He never quite adjusted to tractors or mechanized farming. He had farmed most of his life with horses, big draft horses, Belgians and Percheron horses. And he was known in our part of the country as someone who was really good with horses. He did get them wild and untamed and unbroken, as they said back in those days. And he would gentle break them, always gentle break them. And by the time he got done, the horse would be like a member of the family and would work with the farmer for years and years. And he never quite got over when the horses left. You know, after World War II, the United States industrial plant was just humming with a huge factory capability. And they started making tractors real cheap. And farmers started buying tractors. And everyone had to buy tractors to compete. And some say that after World War II, the first 2 years after World War II, 1 million draft horses were slaughtered for pet food. I don't know if my dad ever quite got over that. He missed those horses. He didn't quite trust tractors. He usually drives second gear, you know, kind of just moseying along. Well, that day, when I saw the tractor coming around the corner of the barn, it was really moving. He was in road gear, high gear. And I thought he must really be worried about me. And maybe I am in trouble. He stopped right where I was standing there, turned the engine off, got real quiet again, looked down at me and said, "What's the trouble?" And I said, "There's a snake over there by Bootsy." Well, unfortunately, it was a garter snake, non-poisonous. And like I said, I thought maybe I was in trouble. But I could see he let go with kind of a breath, like he was relieved that I was okay. And then he got mad. Then he got mad, you see, because you know how it is raising kids and parents. The children are in a life-threatening situation. The parents are worried to death. As soon as the parents find out the kids are alive, they want to kill them. He said he had a lot of work to do and couldn't be coming in every time a little snake was bothering Bootsy. And he climbed off the tractor and walked past me toward the house, shaking his head, said I was bugs, which in our family meant bugs in your brains. And we had an early noon meal that day. We did listen to the farm report that came on every noon from WLS Chicago Barn Dance Station. Chicago used to be the country music center of the country before Nashville. But he did not do a little dance that day. Often when Patsy Montana or Red Foley would come on, he'd do a little two-step or foxtrot across the linoleum floor. But he did not do it that day, so maybe he was even more angry than he let on. And I never rang the bell again. We moved into town the following March. We were tenant farmers. We rented the land, so tenant farmers always move in March because then you've got time to get the crop in on your new place, and the family that moves into your place after you leave, they've got time to get their crop in as well. But we were town people now, and I hated that. It was a town of 200. It felt like the city to me. The houses were so close. But we did get to bring my pony, Patsy, into town with us, and she was pastured out in a neighbor's farm. But my dad had to find different work, and he got a job in a factory. Now, I don't think he liked that, being a man who had worked outside his life, his own boss, working with animals that he loved. Now he was working in a factory. But he said it wasn't so bad. And he said he was tired of all those cold, damp cow barns and all those cold winters for most of his life. It was nice and warm in that factory. Well, the second year in the town, he was laid off. It was 1954, and there was a recession. And my mom and my dad, they were panicked because that little house that they bought, that little frame house for $7,000 on Main Street, right next to St. Peter's Church, they had bought it on contract. Didn't even have the protection of a mortgage. And they were afraid they were going to lose it. And I remember one morning sitting at the breakfast table, and the phone rang. Turns out something wonderful had happened. You know, in storytelling, and we tell these old stories, and we hear these stories, often a crisis, a wound has another side to it. There's an old idea that the place of your deepest wounds might hold the secret to your most important life's work. It's the old silver lining behind a cloud metaphor. Well, when my dad got laid off, a gentleman by the name of Temple Smith, a wealthy industrialist from Chicago, had gone to Europe. He had fallen in love with the whole story of the Lipizzaner horses, the famous white stallions of Vienna, the wonderful horses who did their dressage, their equine ballet at the Vienna riding school over the centuries to entertain the emperor and empress of the Austria-Hungarian Empire. Well, Hitler planned on butchering those horses to feed his starving troops at the end of the war. General Patton heard about it. He loved horses. He diverted his army and saved that herd of Lipizzans. And Temple Smith from Chicago, Illinois, loved that story and loved the horses and bought about 40 of them, put them on a boat and brought them to New York Harbor. Well, they were in quarantine there for a while, and Temple still hadn't found a place for all these horses. He was kind of a grand, impetuous, visionary kind of guy. Turned out there was a barn, though, in Spring Grove, Illinois, not more than 3 miles as the crow flies from where we were sitting at the table having breakfast on that morning. And all those Lipizzaner horses came to Spring Grove. I was very excited. I had just seen the wonderful movie, The White Stallions of Vienna with Robert Taylor, one of Walt Disney's first movies. And I could hardly believe it. These incredible world-famous horses were coming to Spring Grove, my hometown. And then they hired my dad to work with them. He worked with the mares and the foals. And if a mare was pregnant and about to foal, and I didn't have school the next day, or it was a weekend, I'd go with him. And sometimes we sit up all night with the mare. And he and we welcomed a lot of spindly-legged, slippery Lipizzan foals into this world. They're born jet black, and over a 7-year period, they turn snow white. Excuse me. So there we were, me and my dad. We were kind of partners in the farming business, like we had been on those spring days on the tractor. Times when I would help him hitch up the wagon, or maybe I would gather those choke cherries for him. We were partners in the farming business, again, on Temple Smith's Lipizzan horse farm. It's still there. You can go see the horses perform on Sunday afternoons in the summer. But one day my dad, he was leading one of those stallions, powerful animal. Conversano was the horse's name. And he was a sweet animal. They all are. They're cold-blooded, they call them, easy to work with. But it was spring, and he was a stallion, and he was getting out of a stall and being led by my dad over to a new barn. And he was prancing and excited, and suddenly he just bolted, just took off, just about 1,100 pounds of mostly muscle, changing directions all at once. And I remember my dad said, I held on to the lead. My dad was in front of him, leading him with a leather strap. I remember Dad saying, I held on to the lead. If I let go, I probably would have been all right. But I held on. And he fought the horse. And the struggle was too much. And he had a heart attack. And died not long after that, about the time that I got into high school. And this story, has sat idle for years and years, just like that old rusty bell. And there were times in my life when there was trouble, as is true of all of our lives. There were times when I ached to pull on the rope, but my dad didn't have a tractor to come in on, and I didn't have a bell to ring. But now when I tell this story as a part of my life and a part of my work together, when I tell it now, it seems to me like pulling on the rope. When I think that out there, a couple thousand miles away, you now know a little bit about Shorty May, the man who taught me to listen to the land, and the man who taught me to listen to the stories, then I can hear the tractor coming too. I call that story A Bell for Shorty. Thanks a lot for listening.
Jim, thank you so much. And I believe that is the one that the film that you did. This was the local Emmy.
Yes.
This was the winner, A Bell for Shorty.
Yeah, in fact, you can still see that film. It's on WTTW Chicago Public Television, Channel 11. It's called A Bell for Shorty, or if you just Google Jim May, Chicago Public.
We may find it somewhere, but we got to see a private version of it, and
actually, you can just Google Jim May now, and usually I'll come up. It used to be that the first person at the top of the Google search was Jim May RV sales, Elkhart Lake, Indiana. But
you've outlasted him.
But now I'm on top of him, and for a while I felt prideful, But then I started feeling badly because I think it's all happened about 2008 when the recession came, and that poor guy, one day he fires up his machine and he sees that Jim May, the storyteller, is ahead of Jim May RV sales, and the poor guy must have thought my business has gone down the toilet because now I'm second fiddle to a storyteller, whatever the heck that is, But anyway, you can usually find me, and that story is also in a book called The Farm on Nippersink Creek.
Yes,
The Farm on Nippersink Creek by August House Publishers in Atlanta. Nippersink Creek is a creek that runs through our land now, where my wife and I live. And it's a Potawatomi word that means place of small waters, which I think is lovely because small waters are also tears, they're also baptism. They're the amniotic fluid that we that we live in for months before we enter the world. So Nipissing, the Indian people probably pronounced it Nipissek, but when the Germans and English came and settled here, it's Nipissing, but it does mean small waters. Now I have a new book. Well, it's relatively new. It's my second collection of adult stories. Is called Trail Guide for a Crooked Heart. And it's a collection of mostly thoughtful stories, and inspirational maybe. My wife and I fought for some months about the title, Trail Guide for a Crooked Heart. She said it sounded like a manual for burglars. But I stuck with the title because it's from a W.H. Auden poem called As I Walked Out One Evening. And the line that struck me was, love your crooked neighbor with your crooked heart. And we're all crooked. We all make mistakes. We're all imperfect. But we all deserve love and forgiveness. And most of the stories follow that theme. There's also some of my favorite sayings and reflections in the book. One of them that touches on this subject of forgiveness is there's an old saying that if you don't forgive, if you hold a grudge, it's like trying to kill someone else by drinking the poison yourself. So that's the theme. One of the other sayings is from Eleanor Roosevelt, and she said, we have to make mistakes. There's no way we can achieve everything we're meant to do, that we can find out all the new information we need without making mistakes. She said, it's so important to make mistakes that we have to learn from the mistakes of others, because no one lives long enough to make enough of their own. But from your part of the country, you know, there's a wonderful storyteller called Johnny Moses. I don't know if any of you have ever heard him. He grew up on Vancouver Island in the Nootka tribe of First Nation people in Canada. And Johnny Moses said something, and this is in my book too, quoting him, of course. He says something that I think changed my life. He said, in our tribe, my grandmother taught me, in our tribe, the Nootka people, mistakes are windows for the soul to climb out of in order to grow bigger. Mistakes are windows for the soul to climb out of in order to grow bigger. And that saved my psychic butt many times when I was beating on myself for all the mistakes that I've made and continue to make. So that's called Trail Guide for a Crooked Heart, and you may enjoy that if you want to pick up such a thing. I might just tell a story from that book as well, because I love folk tales. Storytelling often pulls us in the direction of personal experience tales. Many of you maybe listen to The Moth on the radio, which are virtually 100% personal experience tales. But I love the old wise stories, because the ancients, our elders for centuries, preserved certain traditional stories, folk tales, myths, sometimes legends, to pass on to the next generation, to teach us how to get along with one another, to take care of each other. And I think this is one of those stories. And some of you may have heard it, but I think my version is a little bit unique, I hope. It's called The Peddler of Swatham. Now, Swatham is a village in England. It's still there. And if you want to pronounce this, you're welcome to retell this story. It's pronounced Swatham with kind of a TH sound in the middle, where you put your tongue kind of up against the back of your teeth like you're saying tortilla in Spanish. It's Swatham. So remember that name. It's the Peddler of Swatham. That's the village where he lives. Well, when this story comes about, the old peddler is getting quite old, and he realizes he hasn't really made precautions, plans for his retirement. In those days in England, Victorian England, if your family wasn't there to take care of you when you were old, and if you weren't rich, you were sent to the poorhouse, which were prisons, actually, and virtually prisons. Maybe you've read Dickens' Oliver Twist or David Copperfield. You know what those poorhouses were like. They had bars on the windows. They were dens of consumption, or tuberculosis, as they called it in those days. The food would be 3 bowls of gray gruel a day. So the peddler was worried about ending up in a place like that because he lived alone. He had no family. He was poor because, well, perhaps he was a little too generous, they would say. For instance, he would go from village to village with his peddler's pack. He'd spread his goods out on a blanket there in the market. And it would be small things that he could carry in his pack, maybe a bit of jewelry, thread, needles, yarn, small instruments that could be carried in the pocket, maybe a harmonica or a penny whistle, things like that. And he would sell those things. But, you know, he would be there and maybe a child would come along. Might be a little girl, might be a little urchin from the street, or a lot of homeless children on the streets of London in those days. And of course, there are now too, all over the world. And while the peddler wasn't looking, the little girl might spy a little silk ribbon laying there on the blanket. And she'd pick it up and she would maybe stroke it. She never felt such wonderful silk and anything so soft. And she'd look and the peddler wasn't watching, so she might put that ribbon in her hair and twirl around a little bit. But then when she saw the peddler coming back to his stand, she'd quickly take the ribbon and place it back on the blanket. But the peddler, in those kind of situations, and it would happen more than once, he would say, now, little girl, now, wait, just a minute, wait a minute. That ribbon looks much prettier in your hair than it does on my blanket. And that ribbon, I can tell it loves you. And if you take it and give it back to me, the ribbon will be sad and it'll cry when I put it back in the pack, and my pack will get all wet and moldy and it'll just be a mess. So I'll tell you what, you keep the ribbon, my gift. And the little girl, you know, she would skip away, so happy that she had something so beautiful for the first time, maybe ever. Or a young boy would come, and the young boy would spy a penny whistle. And he wasn't a musician, or wouldn't be a musician, but he would take that penny whistle and start working the vents, you know, with his fingers. And pretty soon he would play a little bit of a jig, and the ladies in the market might clap, you know, to the rhythm. But then when the peddler would return, the boy would quickly put that penny whistle back down because he couldn't afford even a penny. Now, when that would happen, it would happen more than once. The peddler would say, now, son, wait a minute, just a minute. Now, I haven't been able to sell that penny whistle. And I can see you've got a lot of talent. You really could be a famous musician, perhaps. And I'll tell you what, I'll trade you the penny whistle for whatever you've got in your pocket. Well, a little dirty hand would dive down immediately into the pocket. And sometimes for that penny whistle, like I said, it would happen more than once. Sometimes in trade for that penny whistle, the peddler would get a stone or a ball, a string, or sometimes a frog. But the peddler would go to sleep on those nights, thinking to himself as his head lay in the pillow that perhaps there was a whole troop of children out there playing music to take their minds off of their empty stomachs. So that was the peddler, just a kind-hearted soul. Well, one day, the peddler woke up and he had a strange dream. He dreamt that if he left his village in Swatham and he went to London Bridge and sat on London Bridge for 3 days and 3 nights, he would find a fortune and he would be taken care of in his old age. Well, the morning after the dream, the peddler thought, well, I wish that were true, but it's just a dream. Neighbor came over just then, knocked on the door, and the peddler let him in, made him a pot of tea, and they sat there by the window looking out in the garden. And just then a flock of English blackbirds landed in the peddler's cherry tree and started eating the cherries. And the neighbor said, oh, I suppose you're going to let those birds eat all your cherries in like you do every year. And the peddler said, oh, well, you know, they sing for me every day. Now, these were English blackbirds. And if you've ever been to England, you've heard the English blackbirds. They sing day and night. And they're of the thrush family. They're not like our blackbirds. In fact, they look like black robins, look like a robin that flew into a can of black paint. And they sing gloriously. Paul McCartney's song, Blackbird Singing by the Dead of Night, it's about the English blackbird, the English thrush. It's also about the American Civil Rights Movement. Blackbird fly. They sing for me every day, said the peddler, and I let them have most of the cherries. Maybe I get one pie out of it. Well, you're a fool, said the neighbor. You could shoot some of those blackbirds. You could make a blackbird pie. You know that old nursery rhyme, how much the king would like a blackbird pie. No, said the peddler, the birds and I, we get along just the way we are. Neighbor kind of shook his head and said, well, you're kind-hearted, but you're a fool. And he left. But that night, the peddler had that same dream. And if he'd left his village of Swatham and he traveled to London and he sat on London Bridge for 3 days and 3 nights, he'd find a fortune in gold and be taken care of in his old age. Well, he woke up that morning thinking, that's strange, odd, same dream 2 nights in a row, but he didn't think much more of it. The third night, he had the same dream. Now, you all know, right? Third time's the charm. What do you think he did? He went to London Bridge. And he sat on the bridge there for 3 days and 3 nights. Now, London Bridge in those days was occupied by many homes and businesses and commerce. As many bridges around the world were, London Bridge happens to be the one that maintained that kind of activity longer than any other bridge in the world. It's a useless fact, has nothing to do with this story. But anyways, he stayed there for 1 night and 2 nights and 3 nights, and nothing happened. And he felt like a fool when he woke up that 4th morning. He began putting his pack together and started walking off of the bridge, and he came just to the end of the bridge, and there was a butcher shop. There happened to be a butcher shop there at the end of the bridge. And a butcher came running out and said, peddler, just a minute. Stop, I want to talk with you. Peddler, of course, stopped. And the butcher said, now, I've been watching you now. You've been there on the bridge for 3 days. I've been watching you every day, and I can't tell what you're doing. You haven't sold anything, and you're not begging for alms. Just what exactly are you doing? Well, the peddler told him about the dream, that if he came to London and sat there for 3 days and 3 nights, he'd have a fortune and be taken care of in his old age. Ha! You're a fool, said the butcher. That's not the way you do it. That's not the way you get your fortune. I'll tell you how you get your fortune. You do what I do. You work hard. I open my shop at dawn every morning, and I work all day, and I don't close until it's dark. That's how you get your fortune. Now, in fact, I had a dream. Myself just the other night. I dreamt that if I closed my store in the middle of the day, can you imagine that? Closing my store during business hours. But in my dream, I did. I closed my store, journeyed to a place called Swatham, which I've never heard of, and I found this little cottage. In the back of the cottage was a cherry tree filled with birds. And in my dream, I dug under that cherry tree, and I found a fortune in pirate's gold. Now, you don't see me doing a silly thing like that, do you? And the peddler said, no, I don't. And he went home. And he dug behind his house under that tree, and he found a box, a fortune of buried pirate's gold. And the good that he did for the children in that village with all of that gold, well, that would take me a whole nother evening to tell you those stories. That's an old traditional folktale called The Peddler of Swatham. And my teachers in that story were J.L. Callahan and Elizabeth Ellis. It took me hearing it a couple times before it kind of crept into my heart and my repertoire. But those are the kind of stories, that I love, because the elders over the generations kept these gems alive, remembered them even before the days when they had an ability to write notes. And they remembered them because they were so important, so that we would learn how to treat one another. The Peddler of Swatham. Thank you.
Jim, thank you.
I have one more thing I could do to take about 30 seconds. I mentioned Bootsy the cattle herding Chihuahua. Well, I have a new book coming out for this school year. It's a collection of children's stories, and it's called The Further Adventures of the Boo Baby Girl, who's a character that I invented. And she has a companion, and the companion is Bootsy, the cattle herding Chihuahua. And
Get out.
and I don't know if you can see Bootsy.
Yeah.
She had 4 white feet. That's why we called her Bootsy. And in the book, she is from Mexico, and she teaches the Boo Baby some Spanish words. And Bootsy really did look like that, and she really did chase cows. But full disclosure, she did not speak Spanish. Not at all. So,
Jim, I'm wondering if we could, before we go, if you could tell, this would be another true story, about your granddaughter.
okay, sure. Well, Izzy, my granddaughter Izzy is my youngest granddaughter, and she's 20 now. But when she was 5, we went fishing. And she's quite the scientist. She always has been very interested in everything about nature. And I was so proud of her. She could put the worm on the hook. She could take her own fish, these little bluegills that we caught in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. She could take them off the hook, and she'd hold them, in her hand for a while. Papa, look how pretty they are, Bluegills, they have bluegills, they really do. And I was very proud of her. We got 4 bluegills that day. But then it was time to clean them. Now, I was a little bit worried because my neighbor, when he took his grandsons fishing, they loved it until it was time to clean the fish. And when they saw the blood and the preparation of the fish for the frying pan, they became so upset they never went fishing again. Now, I would have thought, my heart will be broken if Izzy doesn't want to go fishing with me. But that's what we do. We're a country family. We eat what we catch. We don't catch and release. We catch and we fry. So I thought we got to get through this. So I laid the fish there on the grass behind our little cottage there where we were fishing. I got out a board. I said, now, Isabel, we're going to clean these fish because your grandma, Lala, loves fried bluegill. So here we go. Now this fish is dead. Don't worry, Izzy. She won't hear anything. Won't feel anything, rather. Now, because this fish is dead, it won't feel anything. But just in case, I'm going to very, very quickly cut off its head, just to make it clean. So her eyes got kind of big. So I took the knife and darn if that fish's tail didn't go, Papa, it's alive, it's alive. No, it's not alive. It's not alive. That was just an automatic neural response. I'm trying to think back to my high school biology, and just how that would work. I said, but the fish really didn't feel anything. That was just an automatic thing. The tail did. Oh, okay, Papa. Now, Izzy, don't worry. The second fish is even deader than the first one because it's been laying there in the grass longer. So it definitely won't feel anything. But just in case, I'm going to brutally cut off its head. So, and darn if that fish didn't kind of go, Papa, it's talking. The fish is talking. No, I said it's not talking. Fish do not talk. That must have been probably what happened is I punctured its air bladder. What's an air bladder, Papa? Well, the fish has a bladder that fills with air, and it keeps it floating so it doesn't sink down to the bottom of the lake. Well, she didn't believe that. How could a fish sink to the bottom of the lake? So I knew I was sort of losing ground with her confidence. I got to the third fish. I said, Izzy, this fish is even deader than the other 2 because it's been laying quite a long time now in the grass. So I took that, but just in case, I'm going to brutally cut off its head. So again, and darned if that fish didn't squirt a little bit of water, a stream right past her nose. Well, that appeared to be it. She had been pushed too far, my granddaughter Izzy. This was the tipping point, apparently, because she got up. She turned her back on me. She took 2 steps toward the house. Then she turned back, took a step toward me, put her chubby little hand on my shoulder and said, Papa, I got to go potty. Don't cut the head off the 4th one till I get back. So it turns out she's pretty much a gritty country girl. And in fact, I've never told this part of the story before. In fact, she's 20. She's at the University of Wisconsin at Stout, and she's studying environmental science and is working this summer in an internship with the Lake Geneva Land Conservancy. So we're thrilled about that.
Bluegills for everyone now.
Bluegills for everyone, I guess.
Well, I was, if you wouldn't mind, does anyone have any questions for Jim?
Well, not at all. I'd be happy to chat a little bit.
You don't look old enough to have a granddaughter that old.
Oh, bless your pea picking heart. My dad was born.
Granddaughter, but she's one.
My dad was born in 1896, and people kind of looked surprised, and I say, I know I look pretty good for being 104. But you see, I was the last one born to my family, and my dad was 51 years old when I was born. So if he had fathered me when he was 20, I would be 104 years old. But thank you. I thank you for the kind words.
You're hilarious.
Oh, well, thanks.
My name is Erin. I want to thank you for telling a folk tale. I love personal stories, and 10 years ago when I first started telling stories, everybody was telling folk tales.
Yeah.
And I hated them. And then I decided, oh, I think I like them. And now I started telling folk tales, and everybody's telling personal stories. So thank you.
We're swimming against the tide, Aaron, and it's a good for us.
When I first went to the National Storytelling Festival in Jonesboro, Tennessee, I didn't have any idea what it was. Another teacher friend of mine, I was teaching elementary school at the time, kind of dragged me down there kicking and screaming. And I was immediately captivated. In 1979, it was the 7th annual National Storytelling Festival. I don't believe I heard one personal experience story. It was all folk tales. And it was tradition bearers from the Appalachian Mountains. There was Ojibwa, a teller there from the Métis people in Canada, Ron Evans. There was an old sea captain who ran a lobster boat from Maine telling down
Eastern
stories. And it did gradually change. And I realized that I had grown up in a town and where my family had settled in the 1850s, and my grandpa had the general store, and I realized I had this little treasure of personal stories, and I started telling those, and it was a key to starting to begin to tour nationally. And I left my full-time job at a community college in 1986. However, more and more, the longer I'm in this, the more I value folktales and the myths especially. In fact, for years now, I've been doing a workshop to help people mesh their own personal experiences, their own journeys with the classic traditional and spiritual stories of antiquity. And the workshop is called Personal Narrative, Culture, and Myth. And if you get 4 or 5 of your friends together, I'll come to Oregon if we ever get to travel again. But actually, it really could be done via Zoom. It really could. I've been doing the workshop everywhere I go. I take a group to Oaxaca, Mexico every year for a week-long intensive. But to me, we have this culture of birth. And we don't have a lot of choice on what we experience in that culture of birth. Our economic level, our resources that our family has, how we are loved or not, the number of siblings we have to share that love, our parents' love with. And that's our culture of birth, and that's pretty well set. We don't have a lot of choice. But then we grow up and we move into cultures of choice. We start making decisions. We start, that boundary where you decide what to leave behind and what to take with you in your life from your culture of birth is a critically important place and a rich place for stories. And then finally, there's this big circle. To me, it's like a concentric circles, and this big circle all around it is myth. And Michael Meade, who also is up on your part of the country, up in Vashon Island, wrote a wonderful book called Men and the Water of Life. But he said that myth are the family stories of our ancestors. Well, I thought, that fits my model now. We got our own culture, we got the culture we grow up into, and then we got our family, ancestors' family. But I would add that myth is the family stories of our ancestors, but also their dreams, their imaginings, their aspirations, all shaped into an art form that is storytelling, that is myth, spiritual traditions, and it's the gift of the ages for us, and those can be very instructive in helping us not only tell stories or find the important stories in our life, but just to help us to get along and survive in this world. Sorry, that was a long answer.
It gave me time to look in the catalog, and we don't have the Michael Mead. So, you know.
Keep telling those folk tales and myths.
Yeah.
I will.
I just want to say one little thing. I do genealogy, which is where I also get some family stories. But that's how I got into folktales, was I decided to just do stories from my family heritage. And it's taken a long time to find Northern Italian stories. So today I was reading a genealogy article. It turns out 47 minutes by car today from my grandmother's hometown, this man tells stories from the mountains of the Dolomites in Italy.
Wow.
I'm currently in, but it looks like I'm going to have to learn Italian if I want to learn stories, because they don't have any English translations.
Well, you can
But
do it.
I'm trying. I've written the museum, so I'm so excited, because who would think that you would find a storyteller in a genealogy magazine? I don't know.
Congratulations. Well, those kind of treasures are going to inspire you to keep going,
Yeah, and the thing that I love the best, I can't quote him because I don't have it right now, is he said he wants to bring the stories out of the books and put them in front of people the way they were supposed to be told. So that's his whole goal. I'm like, whoa. Yeah.
That's the way they came into the world, and they were sustained even before written language.
Yeah.
Kind of reminds me of something I heard a poet say one time, that poems need to be told, spoken, and heard. That reading a poem is like reading sheet music instead of hearing music. Now, I wouldn't go that far, because I like reading poems too, but it's the same principle.
But it's nice to read them aloud. It really changes a relationship to a poem to read it aloud.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I didn't mean to go off on that.
Well, you're right. It's good contribution.
I've been working on some genealogy stuff too, and the beginning part of it was that I inherited the family Bible, and I was told by the great aunt that the information in the family Bible was suspect, because one great aunt decided to create people that were not in our family tree because she didn't like the people that were there. And
that's a good story.
My inspiration for doing the genealogy was actually to clean it up for posterity, to make sure the real people are in there. Well, the thing it's funny, and this like the light bulb clicked on. We came from a family of Huguenots that were subject to the
persecution,
and they fled through Holland. And they came in through Newfoundland into Canada and down into Wisconsin. And I inherited the last china bowl that came from Holland in 1730.
Wow.
So and apparently this man from the Alsace region of France was so famous for his protesting that he made some kind of huge historical, everywhere he went, he was in the news. And there's a great resource I found in Wisconsin about him being in the newspaper. I was just like, whoa.
Yeah, those are great connections. He would have done real well on Facebook, I bet.
I'm sure he would. He'd do real well in Portland right now.
Well, those are wonderful stories, and that's and that whole you could look at mythology, almost any story that might deal with what is the effect of that kind of persecution. The Irish stories, they have that thread of persecution. There's there's 3 or 4 or 5 Irish stories, for instance, I heard where the characters actually carrying death on their back. And, I think maybe that was the English, occupying all those years. But the
Wow.
persecution of the Huguenots in France was a horrible thing. And it was the St. Bartholomew's Day, where there were so many massacred at once. Was
Yes.
that the day?
Yep.
But so, what does that do to a whole culture? And how does that affect their stories? And so, it's very interesting, I think, to look at those historical strains that you're investigating.
And to put the real people back in the Bible where they belonged, in that
Yes.
fold-out thing in the middle.
Are you kidding? See, I know on a time machine and go back, about 100 years and find that family Bible in my family and just put a couple lines in, yes, Bartholomew, Jonah.
Well,
Well, we don't
And
know.
maybe make a connection to Agnes Douglas. I'm just saying.
there you go. My mom, when she got older, she had a copy of her will. And when she'd get mad at some of her kids, she'd go in and she'd erase their name in the will. So if it was Mother's Day and it was maybe 3 o'clock in the afternoon and you hadn't showed up with a Mother's Day card or a gift yet,
Oh,
you'd go into the bedroom and she'd erase your name from the will. But then if you got there by 5 o'clock with a nice present, she'd write it back in,
oh
So
dear.
she probably would have liked to have edited her family Bible as well if she had one. We
Oh,
Catholics
Lord.
didn't have Bibles, there was too much sex in there.
Ah,
Not allowed to read it.
Well, we had it, but we didn't read it. That's what the priest is supposed to do, for heaven's sake.
oh, you guys. So my French great grandmother was from France, right? But when I started doing genealogy, I found out that her father was not from France. He was from Quebec. But when he was born in Quebec, it was New France.
Wow.
So
I
he
had
was French, according to him, So
Uh-huh.
according to her dad was French. And so that was interesting for me to realize that what they thought their heritage was different. And those people, the Catholics, because of the priests, tracked every single person in Quebec back to 1640-ish when they came over on little tiny boats to Quebec. So I was lucky in that genealogy.
Yeah. That doesn't happen very often. That's a lucky break.
Yeah,
I'm gonna
and they're
that.
pardon?
I'm going to use that because I was told that my grandmother was French, and I started doing the ancestry thing, and I found out she was French Canadian. So
Right.
that's a good idea. I will pursue that line and see if I can go back.
Well, my friend Michael Parent, Parent, has published with I believe it's August House Publishers, a collection of folktales from Quebec. You might want to look into it. It's
I would
Michael
love to.
Parent, Parent, and it's a collection of folktales from Quebec. His
wow.
family's from Quebec.
So
So
One
when
of
he
my
swears, he says things like sacrement, tabernacle. Because
It's possible.
I love that the Quebec swearing is like church and sacrament. These it's like, and your mouth will get washed out with soap for sake.
oh,
So
oh wow.
sorry, that's my Quebec knowledge. I'm done now.
I want
I
to thank you. I want
Funny
to
if you-
thank all of you for being so kind. This was my first Zoom with an adult audience.
Congratulations.
One other Zoom with children, which was a blast. They were kindergarten through 4th grade, and I had them up in kind of a gallery. So I'd be telling the story, and I'd be watching this one little boy about 8 years old spinning around on the kitchen chair during the story. He seemed to be listening. He was just enjoying himself. And then at the end, we had a Q&A, and this one boy was furiously raising his hand, and bouncing up and down one of those big balls that they get to use in schools these days. If you have a certain, I guess, medication you take or something, and he's bouncing on this ball, and I called on him however I did it. And he started asking this question. He was all excited. He was asking this question about the story I just told. And right smack dab in mid-sentence, he stops, looks to his right, and runs out of the room. So it was delightfully unpredictable. You guys have been much better behaved, I think.
We did not run out of the room, but we should probably run out of the room now. But Jim, thank you so much. This has been delightful, and Jim and I have been meeting on occasion on Zoom to figure out what's going to happen, and it's just been wonderful, and I'm so glad that Zoom did not defeat us tonight.
No, we gave us a little bit of a worry. I do want to add that I am more and more interested in coaching over online, or on the telephone, and teaching classes. So you can reach me at jimmmaystories@gmail.com. jimmmaystories@gmail.com, or just Google Jim May Storyteller. I'm the guy above Jim May RV Sales, Elkhart Lake, Indiana.
We'll Google you a lot to keep you above the RV guy.
All right, thank you. That's important.
That's how it works.
Don't you wonder though, with COVID-19, that we'll all go back to like campers and car packing because no one wants to fly anymore? I mean, maybe that's going to be a big deal. Maybe his business is getting good again. We should wish him well.
Yeah.
But not too well, And also you can find him at jimmmaystoryteller.com. So,
Thank you.
there are no RVs for sale though on your site. So that depending on what you're Googling for.
Just books. I have many other products. Actually,
Yes, we actually have quite a selection of them in the library. We do, including Boo-Berry Girl, and several other.
Boo Baby.
Boo Baby Girl.
The kids all say Berry too. There must be something about it. I maybe should do a Boo Baby Girl book.
Give it a try. But if you're looking for something to listen to on the road, I highly recommend some of his CDs, which of course I do not have out here with me because I plan to have.
Have to bring them too.
But this is especially going out to Susan, who lives here. So, well, thank you all so much for coming. Jim, thank you especially.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Come
Thank
back.
you.
Hope to see you soon, all of you. Thank you so much for
I
coming.
hope to get out there and taste some of the oysters.
You got to get here, man.
Bye-bye.